Oh my god, you tried to trick a straight man into thinking he's gay yet again, and somehow you're the victim.
I have never, ever tried to manipulate somebody's sexuality, including his, point blank period.
When he told you he was 14 years old, you still continued to try to force yourself on a minor, a kid, a little kid.
Okay, you are abusing your fans.
Predator, bruh. James is a predator, I actually think so.
Like I mentioned, I am going to be so much more careful moving forward with every single person that I talk to or interact with.
Enough is enough! How many times does this need to happen?
Over the last 2 years, James Charles has been named in some of the largest controversies to engross YouTube audiences, and for the third year running, he is again making the headlines. At the end of 2020, he had seemingly completed his redemption arc, for it to only be revealed there may have been some truth to the claims made 2 years prior. However, that's not to give credit to those involved in the May 2019 fiasco, but instead highlights how much they prejudiced any further allegations against James as a result. The byproduct of such incompetence was failing to establish and hold the warning signs in James's behaviour accountable. Not so long ago, I made a 3-part documentary series outlining the online careers of 2 people involved in the so-called Dramageddon 2 fiasco. Within, I extensively explored the build-up, development, and subsequent fallout of what happened, and the analysis from those videos are still very much relevant. But since then, there has obviously been a slight change in circumstance for one character who was in the spotlight for the most part, and I think it's time we look into him as well. So what a perfect opportunity to wrap up our focus on LA creators by looking into how May 2019 and the events following it allowed James Charles's behaviour to degrade and how doubt was developed due to the actions of others. For that, we need some assistance, and I managed to wrangle the only unproblematic James left to help us explore how we got to this point.
Thank you, BWC. We'll return to that interesting introduction in a bit, but for now I hope myself and Jack here can give you a thorough and nuanced look at a situation that has engulfed online communities for the past couple years, and how they will likely continue to occupy our minds for years to come. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare, the online learning community with thousands of classes for creators where you can explore new skills, expand on existing passions, and develop yourself in creativity. There are many topics to learn from, including animation, film and video, illustration, music, and even marketing. Skillshare is curated for learning, so there are no ads, and there's always new classes launched, meaning you can follow wherever your creativity takes you. One class I've been taking is Advanced Video Editing with Premiere Pro by Geordie from Cinecom, where I've learned some things I never knew before and have used editing this video. As part of the sponsorship, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. But for now, I'm taking you back to 2019. Tati Westbrook, massive YouTuber revered by millions, dropped a video on James Charles after he promoted a rival vitamin brand. At the time, most believed this video because of how compelling Tati was, and because she was a credible figure in the beauty community. She convinced people that James was ungrateful and that there was a darker side to his bubbly YouTuber personality. James's subsequent apology to Tati, where he didn't address the allegations of manipulative and predatory behaviour, compounded the belief in Tati's video and led to the drastic decline of his sub count. Videos from commentary channels came left, right, and center, and so too did more claims from others across social media. Jeffree Star, James's apparent buddy, came out swinging, emphasizing that James was a predator and danger to the public. There were allegations from Twitter accounts posting forged screenshots of messages supposedly sent by James. Pop singer Zara Larsson even came out claiming James had approached her boyfriend on Instagram. However, even as some people started to find inconsistencies with Tati's story.
But if someone is willing to falsely accuse a 19-year-old kid for being a sexual predator over goddamn vitamins that help with their wrinkles, you can bet your ass that I'm gonna drill you, just like any other manipulative piece of shit on this website.
The consensus had sided with her version of events. As the week went on, James had lost over 2.5 million subscribers and was seemingly in the mud. Jeffree Star continued with his offensive, stating he was concerned about James's behavior behind the scenes. At the same time, Tati released another video explaining her reasoning for dropping the video and said that James was seemingly out of control. Or so we thought.
1 week ago, I uploaded a video to my YouTube channel titled Tati. This video was a direct response to the video that Tati Westbrook uploaded to her channel titled By Sister.
On May 18, James Charles dropped No More Lies, his proper response to the allegations made by Tati and others across social media during the week of his cancellation, flipping the story on its head almost immediately. Within, he addressed Tati's frustrations regarding the vitamin scandal, providing receipts for where she wasn't honest. The rest of the video then focused on the allegations that James was a predator. He brought the receipts, lots of them in fact, that not only Tati had egg on her face. Jeffree Star was called out for his bullshit, and the text he sent to James was read. In short, he covered all bases and had the evidence to back it up, something his accusers did not, and he called their bluff. Frankly, it was rather spectacular to watch it all unfold, so too was the resulting backtracking from everyone involved. Tati tried to clap back on Twitter, saying that the video was filled with lies and half-truths, but most had realized her deception. Jeffree Star also came out on Snapchat, saying that James was lying about him, and that he was ready to reveal new things.
I am not a liar. All I know is honesty, and I am hurt right now, and I'm sad.
2 days after No More Lies, Tati conceded defeat and claims she was ending the drama for the good of the community. Unsurprisingly, Jeffree Star also followed suit and released the video Never Doing This Again. He said he still has receipts against James Charles and said he was backing out of the drama to handle it privately. So essentially, his danger to society quip was an exaggeration. Otherwise, he would be withholding vital information from the public. The drama was capped off with some self-righteous dribble from Tati, who then disappeared from the internet for the foreseeable future. Drama over, and how pointless it all seemed. But now we have the quality of retrospect, and we can observe the connections between May of 2019 to early 2021. There is a harsh irony to Dramageddon 2 that had the opposite impact of what Tati and Jeffree preached. In turn, it made it harder for any future accusations to be heard without prejudice, and taught James nothing but give him a false sense of vindication. This is where the seed of doubt was sown, and for that, I'll throw you to the right opinion.
It's hard to look back at the original Dramageddon, because often the only conclusion was that Tati and Jeffree were not honest about the circumstances surrounding James's situation. One of the problems with the online world is that nature of momentum. When someone hits back powerfully and the momentum is on their side, the online communities often have a tendency to uncritically back that person, regardless of what wrongs they may have committed. And make no mistake, James' behavior still demonstrated flaws that would be concerning as a public figure, particularly related to his demeanor towards people who he had significantly more influence than. He seemed to acknowledge this in his No More Lies video.
I do take full responsibility for sending these messages, and this situation has definitely taught me that sending messages that are so forward and direct like this are unacceptable, and I no longer will do that moving forward.
However, when he made that video, public opinion was against him, and therefore it was necessary that he take a stance that expresses acknowledgement of his shortcomings while still defending his character.
I have never, and would never, and will never use my fame, money, or power to manipulate or get any sexual actions from a guy.
This was it, a perfectly balanced video that took accountability for his mistakes, but also pointed out the malicious manipulation by his prime detractors. This shifted public perception and gave him momentum, and perhaps restored confidence that he had previously lost from his audience. The online world, as always, dealt in absolutes, and whereas before James Charles was this dangerous, predatory monster, now he was this innocent, justified victim of a rather crooked conspiracy. And although the latter is partially true, it doesn't encompass the full picture.
I definitely am emotional, and I let that get the best of me sometimes. I can be dramatic, I'm reactive, I'm forward, I'm flirty, and these are qualities that I'm not necessarily proud of at all. But I can confidently say that with each experience, I'm learning more and more, and I've been able to better myself. But a lot of times these situations have become public, my own fault, but having millions of people watching you learn can be very, very tricky.
Tati and Jeffrey were completely wrong. Let's make no mistake in emphasizing that, and the fact that Jeffrey continued to bait drama after the fact was only more shameful. However, the presence of despicable people does not mean everyone else is automatically absolved of any wrongdoing, and as James had recognized himself, he was flawed. He had made serious errors in his judgment. However, now momentum was firmly behind him. Was he going to heed his own words, or was he just a bit too bolstered by this? Although James Charles had been vindicated, he'd been placed in a rather strange situation, where he'd been given a proverbial strike by the internet, a warning shot by the heathens online that he would behave much more responsibly and carefully, given that he is now aware of the consequences of misusing his power, whether those consequences were justified the first time round or not. At the same time, given that he had the momentum, there was no guarantee that he would actually notice that. During the controversy, I don't think James ever presented himself as predatory or malicious towards those around him, but I did detect a serious impulsivity to his actions, whether that was the behaviour itself or his woeful response that was rightfully torn apart by everyone at the time. The problem is that as concise and clear as the No More Lies video was, it didn't feel like it represented James's mentality, especially given his other video less than a week before.
There are always going to be people that don't believe me and will think that I'm lying, and that's okay. At this point, the truth really does not matter.
The No More Lies video was a justified defense of what James's character could be, but was it what James's character really was? Well, I'll hand that back to BWC to answer.
After the events of May, everything seemed to settle. Shane and Jeffrey would release their very successful collaboration and earn millions from their makeup collection, with Jeffrey's actions seemingly dramatized for effect when people called for an inside look at how the drama went down. In this community, drama has a lifespan, and this was just another chapter in the never-ending cycle of controversy. Jeffree Star became the community's talk again when his relationship with an accused child predator was revealed. On March 6, Tamimi released a video linking Jeffrey to Darby Vanity, who was being scrutinized after his return to the internet. Mimi goes on to reveal that Jeffree Star had actually denounced Darby Vanity on Twitter in 2010. However, he seemingly retracted his statements and went on tour with Vanity's band Blood on the Dance Floor. On April 6, Tamimi followed with another video, further outlining how involved Jeffrey was with Vanity and compared this relationship to his actions during Dramageddon 2. At the same time, everyone's favourite grifter Chris Hansen was in full investigation and inquired with Jeffrey for a seat on his pre-recorded livestream show. He also decided to go on the Mum's Basement podcast with Keem, Clown and Banks during the same week. Now, what was said in the interviews was extensively analysed in our series covering Shane and Jeffrey, but for this investigation, we'll focus on the part where he says he still has dirt on James Charles. On Mum's Basement, Jeffrey supposedly reveals a voice memo that appears to be the fabled evidence he supposedly had over James. However, it seems this was not the first time he had leaked this recording to others. On June 28, Blair White dropped a video claiming that Jeffree Star was using this voice memo as blackmail over others, as she felt compelled to say nothing about what she was shown. This video came 2 weeks after T-Channel Ashley Cowell came out saying that she had helped Jeffree Star with taking down James Charles, referring to it as her being on a payroll. In the meantime, a lot of chatter was spreading around this community, and Shane Dawson released a statement where he said he was leaving this community behind after cashing in on its consumers. Jeffree Star echoed his statement in a show of support. What followed, though, was a week of hell for both men. Shane's past behaviour towards children became a key focus of many, with mainstream celebrities such as Jaden Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith condemning a past Shane video where he had inappropriately gestured to a poster of a young Willow Smith. At the same time, Tati Westbrook began to post cryptic tweets, leading many to question what was to come. Shane responded to the critics and released a video taking accountability for his past behaviour on the 26th. 3 days later, YouTube announced they had removed him from the partner program, demonetizing his entire channel. But it wasn't over there, because a day later, Tati dropped her video.
Let's get one thing clear. Tati's video didn't tell most audiences anything they didn't suspect. With the flimsiness of the initial allegations, Jeffrey's invasive involvement, and Shane Dawson's then upcoming series, there had been brewing suspicions that the situation had been manipulated for personal gain for a while.
It's been a long time coming for me to share with you some very, very important things. And I am going to be reading from what is approved by my legal team. So I am, once I start getting into what I need to share with you guys today, what I feel is important to share with you, I won't be deviating, and it's at the advice of my legal counsel.
However, having someone at the center of the drama testify that this was so seemed to cement many's opinion that James had been framed, and threw skepticism onto the narratives that had been weaponized against him. I have to say that I always treat this whole situation with a shade of caution, because once again, as professional and respectable as Tati's demeanor is, she was the person who landed herself in this situation in the first place, and it wouldn't be impossible for her to appropriate a popular narrative that does present her as a victim of Jeffrey's manipulation, especially given that she claims she's unable to present any evidence here.
While I was definitely upset that he had accepted a sponsorship from the biggest rival to my brand, Halo Beauty, I did not make my video because of vitamins. I made it as a result of all of the poisonous lies that were fed to me by Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star. James Charles's Sugar Bear Hair sponsorship and all of the drama that had kicked up afterwards, that was just my breaking point. Yes, I knew that Shane was friends with Jeffree and that they were working together, but I thought to myself, why would Shane Dawson, the king of truth on YouTube, be turning against James Charles unless these things he was saying were true? Why would Shane sit in my home and spend so many hours telling me these horrific allegations if they were not true? Over the course of the next few weeks, he and Jeffree fed me so much information that I felt sick. Almost every day, there was more information and new allegations. Eventually, I started believing what they were saying because they said they had evidence. By the time the drama around James Charles's promotion of Sugar Bear Hair reached its peak, I was beyond gaslit. Shane Dawson didn't just know about my Bye Sister video. He offered to help edit it. He even offered to design the thumbnail and help title it. I declined his offer, but his gesture supported and reinforced for me that he was telling the truth.
With that said, Jeffree and Shane were being presented as innately manipulative people, and although this story is surprising in how naive it presents Tati, it's still consistent with how people know the subject of the upload. And given that at that point, all people wanted was ammunition against them, it provided them with what they wanted.
That is not real! Oh my god!
However, Jeffree and Shane weren't the only people mentioned in this story.
James, I am so sorry that I allowed myself to be poisoned and weaponized against you. I'm sorry that I bought into any of their lies. Believing those lies and allowing myself to be gaslit into making that video is one of the biggest regrets of my life.
Given that the situation did originally pertain to James, he was still a key character in Tati's recounting of the proceedings. Here more than ever, he is presented as the friend who is distanced from our creator at the design of beauty themes. Tati is extremely contrite in her reflection of how she and others treated James, further absolving him of the wrongdoing he was accused of.
I hope there's a small part of this that can help you to feel like you don't have to hate people. It does not fix anything. Even people that you want to cancel. Don't cancel them. Don't hate them. Don't spread hate. Really actually do that. Don't spread hate. You can turn away and give your time to yourself or to something else. You don't have to live there. You don't have to participate. It does nothing.
One of the key details is that this is now being done with retrospect to the original situation. It's been a couple of months, features and caveats that may have been in people's memories are less firm, and can be easily molded by new representations of old occurrences. Now, James wasn't just someone who had his behavior twisted by those around him, he was a casualty of elaborate puppeteering by drama-thirsty YouTubers who wanted to frame him as a predator. This was the prevailing narrative of the moment, and because people following communities often adapted to the opinion that allowed them to launch the most scathing attacks against those they wanted to target, which in this instance was Shane and Jeffrey, Tati's commentary facilitated that. However, it also indirectly embellished James's own victimhood and presented the idea that all these supposed victims were orchestrated as part of Shane and Jeffrey's ploy. At that time, this seemed like the most plausible explanation, but the notion of time can quickly alter perception, as we soon found out.
The chaos that ensued when Tati released her video meant whatever said about James before, during, and after was met with intense prejudice. Doubts surrounding the validity of any allegations became the main focus of public scrutiny, rather than the emergent trend, and this led to many claims being rejected on the basis of clout chasing. Before Tati made her video about vitamins, a model named Gage Gomez had accused James of trying to manipulate his sexuality. This was in direct response to a subtweet from James in response to one of his fans. Gomez created a YouTube channel after James's fans had supposedly attacked him because of his tweet. Within a video, Gomez accused James of lying, making false allegations and defaming him, saying he was not a clout chaser. He went on to release another video and claims he had been in contact with James since January 2019 and says James had tried to manipulate his sexuality. Apparently, he had been upfront about being straight, but James proceeded to try and convince him he was not.
Because, as you all know, this person 99.9, maybe even 100% of the times, goes after heterosexual men.
Messages between Gomez and James were released, in which James appears to say, "You went for a free Coachella ticket and did just enough to make me think you liked me." James then asked Gomez to not make a video. In the end, nothing really came from this. Come Tati's video, more experiences were revealed. James's DMs with one person named Jay Alvarez were scrutinized. 2 more men came forward during the Dramageddon shitstorm, however were yet again dismissed because they were not viewed as credible figures. Touch Delight's past antics and attention-seeker behavior more than likely didn't help him or his friend with their stories whatsoever. At the same time, Tati's waiter had retracted his own statement and said that he lied about his version of events. What's more is that Jeffree Star was unable to substantiate his own claims nor reveal any of the alleged victims he was holding as collateral. Yet again, this highlights how comical the whole Dramageddon saga was and how it made a mockery of victims that go unheard. Succeeding Dramageddon, the allegations stopped, and this silence seemingly lasted for a whole year. It wasn't until after Carmageddon in 2020 that we saw the silence break. In August, a TikTok creator named Ethan Andrew alleged in a video that James had sent him nude images when he was just 14 years old. For this video, Ethan received an immense amount of backlash. He was accused of faking the messages with James for clout, with the supposed IRL also accusing Ethan of being a known liar. As a result, these allegations went completely ignored, but Ethan insisted at the time he was in contact with police and lawyers, with nothing else being said since then. In late 2020, James was dragged into a feud between Trisha Paytas and the D'Amelios after James defended a comment made by Charlie in a video he was featured in. At the climax of this feud, Trisha branded James a predator because of his association with the 16-year-old Charlie. This is all because she made an offhand comment about not hitting 100 million followers within the same year she hit 1 million. Apparently, Charlie was being ungrateful and entitled, as a result, losing 1 million followers because of how stupid this generation of media consumers are. That's beside the point. Trisha was staring the part as they frequently did, and James snapped when they made the predatory remark, claiming they are only popular because of their drama and other nefarious affairs. At the end of the day, the drama was an absolute nothing burger, and yet again strained the belief that James could be a predator. In February of 2021, a 16-year-old TikTok creator accused James Charles of grooming him in videos across TikTok and Twitter. Within, he claimed that James had sent him nude images a week before. The boy named Isaiah claimed that James had added him on Snapchat, and in response, he had messaged him telling him how much of a fan he was. Once James opened the messages, Isaiah was excited, but soon turned to disgust as James had allegedly sent him explicit images. This was then followed by Isaiah telling James he was 16 and that James had brushed it off and asked for nudes and to call on FaceTime. Isaiah says he blocked James when he felt uncomfortable and noted that James told him his age didn't matter. James responded to this allegation on Twitter in a Note app statement saying the allegation made against him was false. He says the incident was the other way around and that he had found Isaiah on Instagram, added him on Snapchat, and was then met with lewd shower images from him when he woke up in the morning. James says Isaiah informed him he was 18 and James proceeded to flirt back with him.
At this point, my main criticism is how James decided it was a good idea to start engaging in sexual courting with someone he had found on Instagram and identified as a fan. He went 0 to 100 real quick, and frankly, that's always going to be a recipe for disaster.
James proceeded to say he was excited that he had found someone he could sext with, and because of this, he didn't ask for ID. He then went on to suggest Isaiah had an ulterior motive as he was recording with another device, saying he was also suspect of Isaiah and that when he inquired about his age again, he had revealed he was actually 16. James says he was the one that was actually uncomfortable and that it was Isaiah who tried to continue the conversation. He then pulls back on his experience in 2019 and that it would be impossible to put himself in that position again. He finished by saying he will verify the age of every male he would converse with in the future. At this point, it was a tale of two stories with conflicting facts and not many conclusive receipts. Isaiah's method of sharing his allegations was scrutinized, and many raised concerns about his motives. There was also concern brewing about the frequency of these types of allegations against James coming out, but there was still so much doubt around the idea that it became a point of contention amongst most people. However, from James's statement came more testimonies. Defamation Noodles started to post screenshots of accusations against James, with one claiming that James had continued to flirt with a boy on Instagram even after he said he was 17, but he says the conversation never became sexual. Following this, a Twitter user posted a thread detailing their disgusting experience with James, alleging they were in contact with police as a result. However, this person did not state their age and said they experienced this in 2019, but were too nervous to come out with their story during the second Dramageddon. Now, about a month after the statement, on March 30, a TikTok posted by a 16-year-old named Jake Cherry alleged that James had been sexting him. The video shows screenshots of Snapchats from James with flirtatious captions. There are screenshots of James wishing the boy happy birthday, all the while there are TikToks on the boy's page identifying that he was 15 before his birthday. The video was deleted because police had supposedly contacted the boy's parents who told him to take it down. The next day, another TikTok user claimed that James had allegedly sent them Snapchats when they were 16. The snaps appear to contain flirtatious captions as well as snaps of himself. More snaps allege that James had engaged in sexual courting through Snapchat, with comments suggesting the boy meet him for a blowjob. This person's TikTok account was banned, but Defamation Noodles brought them to Twitter. The culmination of these allegations then met their climax when James took to YouTube.
This is the video holding myself accountable. And with a premise like that, you can't really say he's doing anything wrong. It's James's duty to hold himself to account more than anyone else. So with the volume at sub-zero levels, you may struggle to hear how James is holding himself to account. But don't worry, I'll do my best to explain it right here.
Today's video is going to be from the heart, and I'm going to focus on what happened, the conclusions that I've come to, and most importantly, holding myself accountable for my own actions.
In this video, James initially alludes to the past scandal, the one we've been talking about, but juxtaposes it here by saying it will not be like that. He expresses remorse for his actions and extends apologies for any parties affected. I never advise putting your apologies for the actual misconduct at the start of a video. Sorry. It's better to establish the circumstances first. However, it's not a make or break for most audiences, and he does give the background and explain his mindset when reflecting on it.
Within the past couple of weeks, two different people, both under the age of 18, have recently come forward saying that they had inappropriate messages to me on social media. One of them being from last year and one of them being from more recent. In both of these cases, I added these people on Snapchat, asked how old they were right away, was told that they were 18, believed them, engaged in a flirty conversation, and then later on found out that they were actually 16. Upon finding out, I was immediately embarrassed and blocked both people. Later on, when I saw them making videos about it and those videos going viral, my immediate reaction, completely honestly, was to be really, really upset. I wanted to get on camera and film another No More Lies video where I gather all my receipts and all my screenshots and try to tell my side of the story and then just move on from the situation. And now, looking back, that was so stupid, because as I did more research on these topics and self-reflected, I realized that the receipts and the screenshots and the specific details of the interaction really don't matter, because I fucked up. And I needed to take accountability for my actions and, most importantly, apologize to the people that were affected by them.
But let's stop it here, because this is the placeholder for the video, the gotcha moment for James, showing him rising above making a No More Lies style video and just saying that he got it wrong. Receipts are irrelevant if you're gonna hold your hands up, but he's incorrect here, especially given his tone. The first part of the sentence that I want to focus on here is, once again, him recounting the events and claiming that these people lied to him about their age. Now, that's not James defending his actions. He can still say he was completely wrong, but it is a defense of his character, because it contradicts the rather unforgiving narrative that many had painted that James was targeting those underage for sexual interactions. If you're under the impression that someone is of age, then the characterization of your behavior is somewhat alleviated. And in those cases, it is important that you provide as much information as possible, even if that information doesn't flatter you. Just look at the Slazzo situation. He was by no means right in his actions, but the specificity in his response and his forwardness on providing information made him seem much more honest than the party that was accusing him. Saying, "I was going to show evidence, but I'm better than that," is never a sufficient response for audiences, because people can just turn around and say that therefore you're not in possession of the evidence. So if he's not even going to show receipts and just apologize, what's the next 10 minutes for?
As an adult, it is my job and my responsibility to verify who I'm talking to, and therefore there is no one to blame for this other than myself. To the guys involved with this situation, I want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I added you, I'm sorry that I flirted with you, and I'm really sorry if I ever made you uncomfortable. It is completely unacceptable.
Further apologies aside, he talks about his own mentality that enabled these interactions, the most prominent one being desperation.
I started doing a lot of thinking and reflecting to really try and figure out why I was actually allowing myself to be so reckless in the first place. It sucks, and it is ridiculously embarrassing to admit this, but I think I have to, and that is that I'm desperate. The idea of actually being in a relationship became so important to me that I was willing to trust too quickly, miss out on red flags, and most importantly, not take the precautionary measures that really anybody, but especially somebody with a public platform, should be taking before talking to anybody. And there's no excuse for that.
And you know what? I can understand one may not necessarily possess the best self-control in pursuit of a healthy relationship. Desperation, loneliness can lead you to develop unhealthy connections with the wrong people. I don't think that makes you an irredeemable person, but I really have to question where the immediate exchange of sexual content factors into a healthy relationship. If you want that safely, go on Grindr. Oh wait, he is on Grindr.
When I've watched videos in the past of people talking about serious topics, such as this one, it's always really bothered me when people would talk about conclusions or changes that they're going to make without actually talking about how they got there in the first place. So I think it's really important that I do that in this video.
And I know the gay community is a bit notorious for its promiscuity. I've had my fair share of negative experiences. But if the people James was interacting with had instigated the sexual aspect of the conversation, his position would once again be less unforgiving. This is where we need receipts. This is where we need the information to show that although James was in the wrong, his desperation got the better of him when someone made an advance towards him. Here, I think some people may find his tone a bit deceptive, because he just kind of establishes that the people he exchanged inappropriate content with lied about their age as an assumption, when they are actively contesting that. James is presenting a road of reflection that may make sense to some people on principle. It makes sense to me. But the problem is that he hasn't affirmed the presuppositions that may make some people confident that this is the path James took in the first place. It's okay if your video isn't like No More Lies. Not every video can be like that, but you still need to provide people an account. Otherwise, you don't give people any reason to trust you, other than your previous credibility with them based on prior situations, which are referenced a fair bit in this video.
At the time that I posted No More Lies, I really thought that like the only issue was kind of like the straight guys and being lied to. But I now realize that it was obviously a much deeper problem, and I really wish that at that time I had spent the time to sit down, look at myself in the mirror, and try to get to the root of the problem and understand why I was actually allowing myself to get into these situations instead of just brushing it off and saying like it's the straight guys and it's the line.
However, and this is a personal opinion, although BWC has analysed in many senses how the old situation is relevant to public perception, it's not relevant to the logic behind his behaviour other than it should have made him less likely to do it. The primary narrative appears to tackle how he fell back into old habits following his commitment to reform behaviour. But once again, underneath the surface, he continues to push this whole lying point of view. It's a very obvious attempt at subliminal messaging.
What I wasn't getting before is that the excitement that comes with talking to a celebrity is literally enough to make somebody do or say something that they normally wouldn't, even if that celebrity isn't intentionally weaponizing their fame, money, or power. And that's the concept that I just wasn't getting. But I now do.
Yes, James, even if a random celebrity who may or may not be James Charles isn't trying to take advantage of another person, that can happen.
In 2019, when I had my whole situation, I was accused of abusing my fame, money, and power to get what I wanted. And when I responded to that at the time, I said that that was disgusting and that I would never want to do that. And to this day, I still stand behind that sentiment 1000%. So when it was getting brought up again, I got really, really frustrated and was trying to understand because I was thinking to myself like, okay, I know that this situation shouldn't have happened. I know that this conversation shouldn't have occurred. I take responsibility for that. But at the same time, like they DM'd you first. They lied to you. They flirted first. Like you didn't use your fame, money, and power to get anything. But I've now realized that that mentality is completely wrong because a power imbalance can happen even when it's not intentional.
Here's the deal. Some people believe James Charles was trying to purposely take advantage of his younger audience, and James does nothing for that apart from very basic platitudes and reflections that are only as trustworthy as you deem them to be. A lot of people expect you to be sorry when you're called out. I think that's a natural response. A majority of people aren't here for the apologies. They're here for the information and the context to your actions. And although James is under no obligation to provide that, audiences are also under no obligation to accept his explanations if they're offered without accompanying substantiation.
For me, having a public platform has become such a huge part of my life that at this point, it does feel normal. But I have to understand that to 99.9% of people, it's not normal and will never be normal. And that's where the power imbalance lies that I wasn't understanding. But I'm so glad that I finally do, because like I said in 2019, taking advantage of that power imbalance is something that I would never ever want to do, but unintentionally was.
Throughout the video, there was this tone that this is the end of it. This is James having the final word and putting the issue to bed, talking about the changes he's made and how he was ready to move on. There was a conclusive tone. Guys, he's so glad he finally understands this. It only took him 2 years as a large creator and being called out thrice to really comprehend what he was missing.
I think that my lack of experience when it came to dating growing up, and then all of a sudden having a lot of attention from different types of men, some for good reasons and some for bad reasons, really affected me in ways that I didn't quite understand. I honestly just thought that I had really, really bad luck and that I was being taken advantage of when that wasn't the case at all. And I had the mentality that I could reach out to literally anybody and use my Explore page and For You page as a dating app. And eventually I would just happen to find the right person, but that's just not how dating works, literally at all.
And listen, I'm not unsympathetic to James's plight here. I know what it's like to be flung against a scene you don't understand and not knowing how to properly react. People will be reckless in their time, and sometimes that's a sharp learning curve for a person to ascend. But I also don't know how you couldn't apprehend that after having a run-in that highlighted that specific aspect as a large creator too. If you're not aware of your own actions at that point, you're not doing something right.
I now understand the root of the problem. I understand how and why I, and only I, caused myself to get into this situation. I understand that this could have and should have been easily avoided, and I also understand that I need to be aware of my platform at all times. I didn't understand how a situation like this could affect the people involved, but now I do. And for that, to the victims, I am so, so sorry. And I promise that something like this will never, ever happen again.
However, James at least understood it now, and he was clearly ready to make a change. Most audiences, though, were not convinced. In fact, they were rather dissatisfied, and although this video was met with warmth by his intimate fan base, the tide soon began to turn, and people seemed to, as a whole, reject this video as a sufficient explanation for a plethora of reasons, many of which I've already discussed. It just wasn't enough. It felt like he wanted to move on as quickly as possible, and maybe he did, but the internet didn't share that sentiment. Audiences are many things, but as a whole, although they may not be able to determine the truth. They tend to detect when someone is lying, and James just wasn't telling the full story, and if he wasn't prepared to, viewers were going to punish him. And they did, inflicting a rather strong YouTube ratio, and sending the message that maybe, just maybe, they weren't ready to move on from it as quickly as he was. But how on earth could people stop him? Well, I guess I'll pass it back to BWC for that.
James's partnership with Morphe was scrutinized, with many consumers and influencers questioning why they had not released any statement regarding James's admission to sexting with underage fans 3 days prior. At the same time, people were calling for James to be deplatformed and for others to stop supporting him. Insider began asking brands about their links with James to receive a comment on what their response will be. "10 days since the video, Morphe is facing extreme scrutiny from the public, with many calling for a boycott of the brand due to its association with James. At this point, it is stated that a total of 15 people since 2019 had accused him of sexual harassment." An email sent to a person from Morphe customer care was leaked, with the representative saying that the brand does not condone inappropriate online behavior of any form. They went on to say they have suspended the marketing of the James Charles collaboration and are going to evaluate and monitor the situation. Insider explores the legal angle after James's admission and consults Emily D. Baker, who is a former deputy district attorney in LA and now a commentary YouTuber covering some of the most prominent legal cases facing online persons, for her expert opinion. Baker says despite the public outcry, a police investigation wouldn't be likely. She says someone has to come forward to initiate an investigation, or the police have to know one of the people from TikTok and launch an investigation from there. Many of the TikTok accusers have claimed that they were in contact with police, but none have been verified. According to Baker, for James to be prosecuted, it has to be proven he was the one holding the phone and sending things. This information can't be disseminated without a court order, or the platforms would be liable for a lawsuit. Baker says this process could take months. Morphe announces it is parting way with James. They claim that in light of recent allegations, they have decided to end their business relationship with him. James responded, claiming that due to the negative feedback the brand had received, he had mutually agreed to discontinue their partnership.
James Charles' channel has indeed been demonetized.
And I don't think there's any better reason to demonetize someone's channel.
James is like the worst of the worst out there right now.
YouTube demonetizing James was reactive more than anything, as the constant pressure for a response made them implement the off-platform behavior policy. Whether this was an appropriate response is really beside the point, because yet again, one of their creators exhibited behavioral issues and their response was to essentially cut ties and do nothing else. Clearly, this issue goes further than James Charles, and the focus on punishments rather than education and prevention is heavily disproportionate. The vulture-like targeting of sponsors, even those that hadn't associated with James in an earlier year, was a point of contention for some, and I have to agree. The discourse surrounding these controversies has become so black and white that it doesn't promote active discussions about the issues, but rather the way the person at fault should be punished. Instead of pointing at sponsors, why not question the fact that things like this keep happening and that nothing is getting done about it?
As is the case with these major controversies, they don't last long at all. Because we can now look back, there was a very obvious issue with James that went unchecked because the focus was on the drama aspect rather than the fact it kept happening.
Because there was doubt about the allegations, there was an inclination to disregard the entire situation. The crux of the problem was that James was putting himself in vulnerable positions by talking to people who were vulnerable to his status. It was self-destructive, and he needed a good break from the internet to ground himself and sort out his personal issues. But this just doesn't happen because people don't understand accountability. It isn't taking away revenue sources, it isn't taking away platforms, it's not using buzzwords with the hope they spur up some outrage. It's getting this person to acknowledge responsibility, explain why they did this, and then preferably having them outline ways they will rectify what they've done. Seemingly, he was held accountable because he was forced to make a public statement where he accepted responsibility and said he was going to work on making himself a better person. Based on that, we'll be seeing him next year.
Or maybe not. In a miraculous self-discovery and recovery arc, James not only managed to correct his behavioural issues, but he also learned how to use his platform properly. Yeah, I'm gonna leave this to TRO.
Thank you, BWC. At the start, our good friend, Mr. Company here, thought it wise to introduce me as the last unproblematic James. But I'm not really one who likes the label of unproblematic, because allow me to be clear, I have a lot of problems. I've had a lot of problems. I did not have an idyllic youth or young adulthood, and that's an unfortunate fact for many people who end up online. But awareness of what you've done and why or how it was wrong is exactly what prevents you from repeating it, and a key to how you can grow into being a responsible person. You need to identify what has predisposed you to behave in such a way and remove those influences. They may be external, such as those relating to the people around you, life circumstances that are in part beyond your control, but they're also likely to be internal because many people face down adversity in their own life and don't necessarily react in a destructive way. There has to be something in how you perceive a situation that is flawed as well. It doesn't mean you're a terrible, irredeemable person, but it definitely means that there are several internalized problems that need to be fixed before you can continue acting in the capacity that you have been. James Charles formally left the internet after his initial response, occasionally returning to announce development in his situation, as BWC has noted. However, even though these statements weren't necessarily designed to address the controversy directly, I was still slightly concerned about how it was being framed. For example, his tweet pledging legal action against any fabricated stories. Here he says, "I spoke and took accountability for conversations I had with individuals who told me they were over the age of 18. Now, given the nature of these conversations, I can understand why he may want to downplay their nature. However, once again, prioritizing that narrative that they told him they were 18, when at best it was a damning failure of James's own due diligence, is not really the taking accountability you'd hope to see following his holding myself accountable video." Speaking of which, where did it go? It appears the video where he takes accountability has been taken down, so I guess that's all the accountability taken. Well, not entirely. As foreshadowed, although many people expected him to be gone at least a year, James made his triumphant return after a few months, releasing a new video called An Open Conversation, where he decides to address his hiatus and everything he has learned during it, while doing makeup. How delightful. Though maybe he should have focused more on the foundation of his narratives rather than that on his face.
As you know, over the past couple of months, I have been offline. After I posted my last video, which was holding myself accountable, I felt as though it was really, really important for me to actually hold myself accountable and take a major step away and do a lot of work behind the scenes until I was ready to come back. I really want this today to just be a super, super honest, raw, unfiltered, sit-down conversation between myself and anybody else who wants to listen. There's a lot that I want to talk about in today's video. I have a lot of positive topics, but I also think it would be ridiculous and irresponsible to try to just come back to social media and pretend like nothing happened and move on with regularly scheduled makeup programming. So I do also have some pretty serious topics to discuss in today's video as well.
It starts off somewhat okay if you ignore the fact that it's a bit too soon for most people. His intent seems somewhat noble, and he seems determined to not fall into the traps that other creators have when returning to social media, even those that he has sometimes fallen foul to himself. He seems more focused on taking responsibility for his actions, whether you believe his version of events to be accurate or not.
A lot of people I felt like this is just another James Charles scandal that I could easily move on from like nothing ever happened. And I really feel as though it's important for me to just address right away that that is absolutely not the case in any way, shape, or form, and that could not be further from the truth.
However, then he begins to argue technicalities, which, although not wrong, doesn't seem completely crucial to his points.
First of all, I feel like calling this a scandal in the first place is just not an appropriate word to be using with this situation. There's no denying that I've been in my fair share of scandals online, but using that word with this situation just feels really, really wrong. And it really feels like it's making light of what actually happened, and I don't want to do that. I definitely have not been taking this lightly. If I thought that this was just some stupid scandal that I can move on from, I would not have uploaded my last video, and I would be posting on social media like nothing ever happened.
It's also a bit ironic that once again he's back after a few months while claiming that he takes the situation very seriously.
Even though the situations are not connected, even though it's a different thing, it really looks as though I have made no progress, I haven't listened, I haven't learned, and that sucks so much.
I mean, I do think they are kind of intertwined, James. You pledged to make a change with regards to your romantic behavior, and whether or not it was the exact same situation, it's still underlined by the same themes of a distinct lack of self-control around people who are clearly in a vastly different position to you. If you can't at least see the parallels between that, then you're probably failing to identify the actual problem you suffer from.
This isn't just something that I can move on from. I am aware that, no matter what I say in this video or 10 videos down the line or a year's worth of videos down the line, these stories and accusations are going to follow me for the rest of my life and the rest of my career, and that sucks so much. It's not even funny, and it's so horrifying and embarrassing, but at the end of the day, it's my own fault and my own responsibility to, take accountability for what I did. I want to be held accountable for what I did do, and all I can hope is that whether it be, weeks, months, years down the line, I'm able to showcase my growth in the person that I really, really am.
However, once again, then his tone changes quite suddenly.
There was basically one drama channel on Twitter that started a thread and started compiling a list of anybody that said literally anything about me on social media. And after what felt like weeks of somebody new coming forward every single day, it eventually became the 20 victims of James Charles. I'm not going to go through this list one by one because I know that nobody wants to sit here for an hour listening to me talk about this, but I do feel as though I have to say something because I am just not comfortable with this video or really any video moving forward allowing anybody, let alone my followers, to think that there are any victims of James Charles, let alone 20 victims of James Charles, because that is completely, unequivocally not true.
James, I would happily sit here for an hour if that's what gets us to the truth.
Now, to be fair, there were several other drama channels and even news outlets and reporters that were calling out this person for knowingly posting fake stories and information time and time and time again, and I am really, really appreciative of that. But the problem is, we are such a headline-driven society that people don't see that information being corrected or, being taken down. All they see is that initial headline, which literally said the 20 victims of James Charles, and that's the information that sticks with them.
The next 8 minutes is dedicated to debunking a lot of the assumedly false allegations that have followed on from the initial situation. It's quite strange because he seems quite reserved and passive during the first 8 minutes. His eyes are wandering, he's doing the makeup, and then we move on to him defending himself, and he locks on to addressing those allegations like he's activated Sister Terminator mode.
When I posted my last video, I recognized that although I was not guilty of what I was being accused of, I was not innocent in general and did need to make a lot of changes and apologize moving forward. So I'm not trying to invalidate any of those people, but at the same time, you can't be a victim of something that did not happen. And with all these people making completely fake conversations and screenshots and posting videos of a 5-minute conversation just to get attention and clout and likes and go viral on social media to add to this crazy narrative, all it does is discredit and disrespect the people that were actually affected in the first place, and it waters down the severity of the issue and the situation going on, but it also discourages people from being able to come forward in the future, because when it's so easy to Photoshop and edit these conversations from beginning to end, nobody's gonna know what to believe, and that is a really, really dangerous situation.
And once again, it's not like his points are invalid, but I feel that their positioning is too prominent and given emphasis that it hasn't earned, especially given how James responds to them. Because if you're not an avid follower of the drama, James isn't particularly helpful as a narrator, even though we know he's more than able to throw up receipts when he needs to.
The last thing that I kind of want to talk about is that I know when I upload this video, there's going to be a lot of people that say, okay, cool, James, you said this before, so where's your receipts and your screenshots to back it up? And that's totally valid, but I'm going to let you guys know right now that I am not going to be including any in today's video. And I could sit here and say that that is because I'm trying to be the bigger person and grow and not get involved in tea or drama anymore, and that would be true, but the real reason why I'm not including screenshots in today's video is because I don't have them. I know that I kind of became known for that after No More Lies, but that was such a different situation where I had months and months worth of texts and DMs that I could super easily pull together a timeline and prove my innocence, whereas in these situations, for the ones that were real at least, these interactions lasted for 5 minutes, an hour, a few days at maximum, and I just wasn't sitting there taking photos of everything that was being said.
Now, Mr. Charles shouldn't fake receipts if he doesn't have them. At the same time, I feel like without any receipts at all, not even the ones of people accusing him, it's very hard to grasp what he is talking about from an outsider's perspective. It wouldn't be difficult to include documentation of the context for the topics in question. Otherwise, people are left with only James's perspective and their own judgment on his reliability, which for many is already predetermined. I believe he is referring to Deaf Noodles, I think so, but I'd never actually read that thread when I first watched this video, and if I was an internet casual or a James Charles viewer, I would be none the wiser. I think you should always prioritize informing your audience on a situation if you're going to talk about it, otherwise you're decreasing their ability to judge it. Additionally, this explanation is quite different to what he said previously about wanting to rise above using receipts, and makes his previous video look slightly dishonest on this front, which may explain why he deleted it.
You know, I know the person that I am, I know what I've done, I know what I have not done, and I know what I need to work on, and all I can hope is that there will always be people out there who are willing to let other human beings learn and grow from their mistakes, and I just really look forward to hopefully showing that in the future.
I don't know if the extra allegations hold any truth to them. To be frank, on scrutiny some of them appear to fall apart quite quickly. However, the fact was that some inappropriate interactions between an unbelievably powerful creator and his underage fans indisputably occurred, and we want to know what James has learned from that. Well, when approaching the 17-minute mark, he begins to delve into that aspect of his life.
Oh my god, the problem is the list of 20 to 25-year-old queer men that are also in the public eye with a large following is just really small, and I'm friends with almost everybody that is on that list.
Oh, well, excuse me.
Now, I'm not bringing any of that up to ask for sympathy or act like woe is me. Once again, I recognize that these type of things can happen when you have a platform. It's up to me to protect myself and make sure that I am not allowing myself to be so easily accessible to let those people in the first place. But I'm simply bringing it up to say that it's really complicated, and these are all things that I've learned over time, and I'm still learning and will forever be learning to be the best version of myself or the best potential boyfriend in the future.
And to be honest, if you believe his story, I don't think this part is particularly bad either. If anything, he does address the mindset that landed him in the position he was in, and the changes that he's made, but it's hard to ignore a glaring logical error in his reasoning which makes his story a little less stable than it should be.
I really was convinced that I was able to live this like Hannah Montana double life fantasy where I could be James Charles, the internet persona beauty guru during the day, but then later on I could wipe my makeup off, get in normal clothes, and talk to people on Instagram DMs or on a dating app, or even hang out with somebody and have them see me as James Dickinson. And looking back now, I am so angry with myself that I was ever this delusional to think that it was possible. It's a lovely thought and a lovely idea, but the reality is they're the same person. And until I gave somebody the opportunity and the time to get to know me and my heart and my soul, they were always going to see me as James Charles, because that's what I put out there on my platform to millions and millions of people, and I just wasn't understanding this, but now I finally do.
I can understand why someone may want to have a life separate from YouTube. In fact, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm sure it makes perfect sense to a lot of people. However, the point was that Hannah Montana was actually the alias of a person who did live a separate life. James Charles off YouTube was just James Charles, and he wasn't interacting with strangers, he was interacting with fans as a huge influencer. There's nothing separate about that. And if they'd lied to him about their age and he was just some nobody, maybe he'd have more of a case, and his response would probably be more believable. This is also quite a different explanation to the initial desperation narrative, and given that neither of them are particularly sturdy, it feels like there's some information that we're not receiving. Now, in James's defense, he does state that this was a delusional frame of mind, and he thinks about it relatively critically, but in doing so, he underlines one of the key problems with his apology. The makeup tutorial aside, okay, I understand that he wants to do it for his anxiety. I'm not going to hate him for that. Even with that said, it's still surprisingly casual for what he's addressing. This whole explanation feels a bit personal to me because I've suffered from delusions, and it's not something that you kind of go, oh well, that sucks lol. It's a delusion. It's serious, and as much as you are a victim of it, you still have to know how that may affect your behavior and those around you. Delusion is one of the most serious words James uses in the whole video, yet it's embedded in a rather casual tone which makes it seem so out of place. Whether James Charles is solely responsible for the circumstances that have precipitated his behavior, it's a serious problem all the same. And even if his explanations are mostly coherent, there's something so fundamentally hollow about what he's saying, even if on some level it makes sense. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd rather someone publish a passable response than a bad one, but it does feel like someone saying, look, I've ticked all the boxes, allow me to get back to work. A lot of the stuff is addressed in brevity and little detail. Now, I understand that as the person who has been framed in a particular way, he may feel like he wants to distance himself from his act, but it doesn't feel sincere here. The only way he'll completely sever the association between himself and these actions is if he's appropriately harsh on himself, and the video just doesn't feel that way. Even though I think he should have. When it comes to the individuals in question, the issue is not whether James did or did not ask for ID. The problem was that it didn't even take that to find out their age. These people weren't keeping it a secret, and I don't think James is being completely honest, because if Jake, for example, really cared to lie, then why would he have a public TikTok showing showing off his age. Do I think someone like Jake told James his age and James was just like, send me the nudes, baby? No. But do I think James asked? No. In my mind, logically, if James really was that concerned about the age of people he was interacting with, the first thing he would have done is checked out this guy's account after asking. Maybe he just assumed that because in this case the guy was super tall, he was of age, but that's really not sufficient logic. And once again, this isn't the only situation, though we don't have as much context to the others. I'm sorry, I just think James is pleading too much ignorance in the court of common sense. And maybe it's just me, but whose first thought in an interaction with anyone, let alone a fan, is to sext? Other than when you're on Grindr, okay? But we put that aside. And let me make it clear, I think some of the narratives being spun around the situation are preposterous. And I mean that wholeheartedly. The Twitterati who regularly argue for rehabilitative justice are calling for him to be jailed, as if that would do someone like him any good. I think people calling him a paedophile are also wrong. I don't think his behavior really reflects that. I do sincerely hope he finds someone to disprove that narrative. One of my acquaintances remarked that this expectation online that once you become an adult, suddenly you have a white picket fence, a wife, children, and a full-time IT job, and any misconduct should ruin you for life, when the reality is vastly different. There's no magical transformation. You can still be dumb and irresponsible as fuck without being a malicious pedophile. Anybody well qualified in psychology will tell you there isn't a set age limit to maturity, and some people will be more mature and some will be less. It's just important to intercept the people who are legitimate threats to their audiences, the Austin Joneses for this world, and I don't think James Charles is an Austin Jones, judging by the interactions. With that said, whereas one's age isn't a choice, power is, and those age limits of consent for sexual activity are still in place for a reason. In some European countries, for example, although the age of consent is below 18, it increases to 18 when the older individual is in a position superior to the younger party. Even if James Charles isn't these people's teacher, he's still infinitely more powerful. If you can't respect that as a public figure, then you can't really retain your platform until you have convinced people that you've changed. And I think it's just a struggle in the window of time that he's given himself and all these additional details and observations, with the removal of his original video and the upload of a video that does explore his mindset but doesn't really fully explain exactly why this happened. To begin a change, you need to cut out the constituents that caused the misdeeds in the first place. And I think the problem is that many would just not convince James Charles has done so. And maybe that's because one of the factors was the online community himself and how he interacted with it. In particular, the beauty community. The beauty community has been crooked for ages, and you can see that by the old James Charles drama. The worst figures like Jeffree Star are genuinely concerning and nasty people who bait allegations to try and one-up those around them, and even the nicer individuals like Tati Westbrook, who is seen by many as the mum of the community, an acclaimed victim of manipulation herself, published a video that utilized gay panic narratives on the back of a feud over hair products. Some have been asking whether Tati was really right, which no, she wasn't, and she already admitted that. Unless you want her to go against her own word again, throwing her credibility into question as a whole, then I suggest you don't venture too far down that avenue. So many creators sacrifice their audience trust in trying to scramble together a narrative that fit their established points of view that seemed popular with the viewers at the time. And every time those expectations were subverted, the foundations of these beliefs only appeared weaker and weaker. It started 2 years ago, it only escalated here. This drama makes everyone look bad, but James is the centerpiece. Whereas he came out stronger from the prior drama, reclaiming his humanity from the community that had so callously warped his image, he seems to have regressed to the unapologetic portrayal that many painted of him the first time round. And not because of what they said the first time round, and not just because of what he did this time round, because his response emanated that superficial charm that so many beauty creators demonstrate when addressing drama. The idea that there's no humane motive behind their responses, that this is just because he thinks it's what people want to hear. When you register that superficiality, you don't really know how someone's actually sincerely making changes to themselves internally, which is going to reinstill faith into their status as a large influencer, even if they've expelled other circumstantial factors. James should have been particularly aware of this due to the previous drama, where, even though the claims were seemingly unfounded, still sent the message that he needed to be careful in his conduct as a large creator.
Whenever anybody apologizes, personally, I always think it's really important to not only apologize, but also to be able to explain that you understand how what you did was wrong and why it affected somebody and how you're not going to do it again in the future.
James explains that an important factor for a creator returning to their platform is this idea that they can express how they understand the error in their ways. And although that is partially true, actions speak louder than words. And if someone already knew what they were doing was wrong at the time, like many alleged James Charles was doing, then of course he'd be able to explain it because he knew at the time what he was doing was wrong. I think critics of James Charles will always find it very easy to find fault with his video because it feels like he's setting up a way out for himself. If you believe he's being deceptive, then it's just another part of the problem rather than the solution. There's something not human about James's return, like it's been propelled by an algorithm. If the allegations reflected the tone he had used when addressing them in his video, then maybe this amount of time would be an acceptable hiatus. But they're a more serious problem than he implies. Even if James Charles is suffering from the problem as well, it's not healthy. And I've never seen a case of delusion handled with such nonchalance, though that does seem to be a problem with online creators. I've always argued that one of the key ways to establish a person's character is to work out why they did what they did. And after this video, I can honestly say I still don't know why James Charles exchanged explicit images with such fans, and his explanations make me none the wiser. Setting aside the contention between ages, he had no legitimate connection to them beyond the fact that they were fans, which, if that was a motivating factor, would mean he abused their trust. As for his desperation and other synonyms, I can understand why someone may find adult gay communities rather intimidating and avoid them in ways that restricts them significantly and pushes them into corners. But James is a promiscuous person, as shown. Even if he's not particularly sexually active, he's on Tinder, he's been on Grindr, he's out there to say the least, and the idea that he was starved of any attention just doesn't hold up. Now, I understand that much of the attention that he receives online is shallow and can leave you wanting more, but he wasn't looking for anything meaningful here, so that doesn't change any of the circumstances surrounding the situation. And I guess that's why people don't believe him. Something still needs to change until others can feel at ease with the situation. We don't have the full picture. Like a lot of these situations inside the beauty community, it feels like there's more makeup than transparency. It feels like there's more of a motivation to just return to making the content rather than growing as a person. I really do want to sympathize because I don't doubt that the last couple months have probably been rotten for James, but I can't provide that until I really feel I have a clear and honest account. And although James can talk about his feelings in a very compelling way, his ability to provide information and context is lacking. Even if I trust he wouldn't commit these specific actions again, it's hard to trust he's fully eradicated the root mentality behind it. I don't believe he's been entirely honest, and it's really hard to work with a video then that relies on your trust. However, the inconvenient truth is that audiences aren't entitled to closure, not our situation, after all. And I have a feeling this is going to be one of the open-ended situations where we don't fully understand why everything happened, nor the motivations behind it. We can merely wish that it proceeded differently and hope no more harm comes from it. We can't force the truth out there, but it doesn't make the uncertainty any less frustrating.
Of course it can't fit. Whatever, honestly, it's time for this to go in the trash anyway.
James Charles is continuing a fairly unexceptional upload schedule with a slightly more low-key tone. His videos receive a noticeable number of dislikes, but nothing that overwhelms it currently. His views are down though, and whether he'll be able to ride out the storm of disapproval and dissatisfaction is a question that will be answered in the coming weeks and months. But whatever the outcome, it feels like the shadow of this situation is a long and dark one, which I guess you could say sucks. Back to you, BWC.
Thank you, TRO. As our top hat bearing friend suggested, there is no closure to this story. With most situations, there is an apparent winner, someone who was better off than they were before. But with this, there is no chicken dinner. It's strange to perform a retrospective look at something we've looked at in retrospect numerous times. But in time, we will more than likely look at this again with much more information. When? Couldn't tell you. But that's the beauty of the internet. The clock's always ticking. Until then, we're just along for the ride. Thank you to TRO for joining me on this project. Since we both made videos and we're probably eventually going to cover it, it felt justified to work together on this one. Also, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and thank you for waiting this long for another video, although you won't be waiting long for the next. Until then, thank you for watching. Goodbye.